to my YouTube channel. My name is Wrath, and today I'm going to be recording this video explaining to you which weapons I think are the most viable for PvE in the Monument to Lost Light at the tower in Destiny 2. So you guys can maybe, if you're new to the game or trying to get a better understanding or trying to know what you should buy, then you can, maybe hopefully this video will help you. Starting off, we've got the tier list up here. We got the tier list up here where we have the tier list up here where we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to be showing you what weapons there are and that sort of thing. And we're going to go off in order, and we're just going to go from the Red War exotics all the way to Lightfall, even though the Lightfall one isn't really, a monument weapon in my opinion because it's a pre-order bonus. But we're still going to go over it just because it's in the monument in case you guys decide to pre-order and get the game. But starting off with the Red War, we start off with a weapon called Sturm. Sturm is a 120 hand cannon, so high impact frame, 3-shot and crucible, just kind of a general basis for it. This gun, pretty much what it's used for is that when you kill with it, it reloads any gun that you have in reserves, like any energy weapon from reserves. So you can use it in PvE. The thing about this gun, though, is that it's really, really good with the catalyst. And the thing about the catalyst is that this thing pairs better with Drain. Drain is a weapon that is now recently craftable, which I would say brings this weapon into more viability due to the fact that craftable weapons have enhanced perks. But that's all I'll say about that for crafted weapons, since this is a video on the monument. But I think that Sturm, honestly, for a hand cannon, has some viability in PvE, just due to the fact that it's like it reloads your weapons, from reserves. I mean, if you really don't want to have to reload or you're constantly hot swapping and that sort of thing, this is a very good weapon to have. Once you get the catalyst for it, it actually gets a significant boost to range and its handling. And I mean, I guess I grabbed these weapons from onto my person so that you guys can see, or not, range and handling. So as you can see, once you complete the catalyst for this weapon, you have plus 20 to the range, making it 90, and then the handling is 70. So it makes the aiming on the weapon a lot better. Which is one of the things that I guess, with high impact hand cannons, you really usually suffer on the handling. And, but overall, really good stats, I think. The stability isn't terrible. You can obviously pair this weapon with, Drain, and it also gets, a pretty significant damage boost when you get kills with Drain. Which, I mean, sidearms and hand cannons aren't really used too much in endgame content. But there is on occasion, sidearms occasionally have, anti-barrier piercing rounds. And sometimes hand cannons, they commonly have unstoppable and that sort of thing. But you could run potentially this in like an endgame content because it does have good range, which is what you want. But overall, I think that just because of the way that Sturm is, we are going to go ahead and we are going to put it in the B tier, just because it doesn't have it is a primary with kinetic ammo, so it doesn't have any synergy with any subclass really in and of itself. So that's why I'm going to put Sturm in the B category, because it's a little bit niche. It's not top tier. I wouldn't say it's bad. It's really right in the middle of the pack. But moving on to our next weapon, we've got the Mida multi-tool, or Mida, or however you want to say it. Many people say this thing different. It is a 200 RPM scout, so it fires relatively fast. Mida's thing about it that's really, I guess, good is that you never lose radar on this thing. If you're ever in, any sort of content where it's like you have to hold a position, or there's numerous enemies coming from all around you, I mean, that can be very useful. It is considered a lightweight frame, and so I mean the intrinsic trait is that its weapon boosts movement speed, which is kind of bad due to the fact that there's, the lightweight frames for a normal scout is that they get boosted movement speed. So the only thing you're really getting out of this is that, I mean, you've got really good aim assist, really good reload speed and handling. So a really good weapon that you can pull out and use to stay alive and that sort of thing. But really, this weapon doesn't have too much going for it. The range is honestly subpar for a scout. I mean, you could still use it because you have such fat aim assist, but your damage fall off is going to be really bad for endgame content. So Mida, in my eyes, I mean, is pretty bad. And especially there's sometimes, that your radar is disabled. Not usually in, like, the highest endgame content. They usually don't take it away or that sort of thing. But it's like if you lose the ability to even see your radar in any PvE content that's semi-challenging, then Mida's going to be essentially kind of useless, to be honest. Even though it is a scout, and scouts usually do fare a lot better because of their range and the ability to hit shots and crits and that sort of thing. So I'm going to be putting it in the C tier. Moving on to Rat King. Our next weapon, Rat King, is kind of an interesting weapon. And I guess on a side note, Mida does have a catalyst. I guess I'm going to look up here, I guess, what the catalyst is. I'm going to look at what the catalyst is, real quick for Mida to see what it is, but I really don't think that it's something that, will probably bring it over the top. I have never gotten it. But I don't think it's anything, I don't really see anybody using this when they go into any sort of endgame content. I don't know why my internet is taking a crap. Apparently it's just, doing really, really bad. Or maybe it's Light GG. I have no idea. Why isn't this loading? Okay. Upgrade the weapon. Upgrades once master worked. Okay, I'm really... trying to figure out my multi-tool. I guess I'm kind of what does Mida? We're just gonna kind of because it's really great. Increase the time of this weapon. This is a big push when I was using this content. So you get more reload speed, which I'm assuming the reload speed goes up to 100. So it's like, yeah, you have, I guess, a weapon with 16 rounds, which is pretty typical. Not that many, I guess. Good recoil direction on this thing. But yeah, reload speed goes up to 100, which really doesn't give it that much more viability, in my opinion. It's like, it's good to be able to always be able to fire and have reload speed, but it really isn't something that's kind of insane, for it to have. Like, it's been hit pretty hard with the viability of other exotics. But moving on, we're gonna go to Rat King. Rat King is a weapon that, you can turn invisible once you get a kill with it. It is a sidearm, a 300 RPM. sidearms are pretty strong, and 300 RPMs are the strongest. They are the strongest out of all the sidearms, in my opinion. They fire very fast. They have good precision damage, and they kill very quickly. And like I said, I guess a couple of weapons go drain as a 300 RPM, but this is obviously an exotic. The perk for it is interesting because Rat Pack really isn't that bad. I've seen DPS videos on this, and I've never actually used Rat King myself, to be honest with you, but it's like I've seen videos where it's like if you have a full fire team with this thing on it, it actually does quite a bit of damage. And the thing about it is, I guess it's fully automatic, which doesn't really matter too much. But you talk about a weapon that, I mean, you can definitely make a build with this. Invisibility is very strong in PvE. Usually you use something else, but I think that Rat King, just because it's a part of a strong archetype, and it is a little niche, I think you can put it in the B tier, because the ability to turn invisible, you can definitely use that with like Void subclasses, and I mean more, and the thing about it is that the weakest Void subclass, in my opinion, for PvE is at this point, is the Warlock Void subclass, even though Warlock Void subclass is still, pretty good and pretty viable. It has very good DPS options. And then it's like if you're running Titan, you got Bubble Titan, which is really good for PvE content. And a Titan that's turning invisible is just going to be very hard to kill. And then you obviously got Hunters that they use invisibility anyway, so it's like you can constantly be invisible. And, sometimes in endgame content, it's like invisibility can be the difference between getting a revive and not getting a revive. Not saying you'd be using really Rat King that much unless it had some sort of anti-champion mod. But overall, I think Rat King's pretty niche, but it's not terrible. So that's why I'm putting it into B tier. Our next weapon is Sleeper Stimulant. Sleeper Stimulant is a linear fusion rifle, which is short for pretty much you charge this thing and it shoots a laser beam, but in this case, 3 laser beams from Sleeper. And I'll show you guys the weapon on my person. When you get the catalyst for this, you have more ammo reserves, and it also speeds up the charge. The thing with this gun, when you first get it and you don't have the catalyst for it, is that the charge time is like over 1,000. It's like 1,000, and it's like milliseconds or something like that. So it's like you do the math, but getting the catalyst isn't too hard. And I guess it reflects off of surfaces. And then also the other thing is that it's pretty easy to aim because you got moving target. Not that you're going to be moving a lot in in-game content necessarily, but it's pretty easy to hit your shots with this thing. And you obviously get more ammo, which just means more precision hits and more damage. Personally, to me, Sleeper got nerfed, but if you're a person that just started playing the game, it is one of those weapons that you could pick up and still do pretty, at least decent, damage. And it's obviously a free get in the, it's a free, weapon that you can acquire, given that you have an exotic cipher, which I'll go over at the end of the video of how to get one of those really easily. And I'm going to put Sleeper in the A tier because, overall it's really easy to get. It's obviously a linear, which have been kind of the meta DPS weapons for a while. It's one of the few linears, I think it's the only linear in the monument that is 4 DPS, because there really isn't that many of these in the monument or anything like that, or that many exotics that are high damage and that sort of thing. So that's why I'm going to put Sleeper in the A tier. But moving on to our next weapon, we have Worldline Zero. This is a very fun weapon, but I wouldn't say it's good at all. The thing about it is that this weapon requires you to be up close, and the only sort of thing that I would say, is good for it is if you... I wouldn't even say this is good in endgame content. Like, swords are just one of those that they They do not do well in endgame content. You typically will get shredded for using any of them because you have to be right up on the enemy. And World Line's a fun weapon, but in terms of PvE endgame viability, you don't really want to use this at all. I'm just going to put it in the D tier. I don't even think it's niche. I think it's kind of, if you were running this, it's going to be a meme weapon. Even if there's arc burn on the end and you're going to hit people really hard with the charged attack, you have to sprint for a while. And it's like if you get the catalyst, you do, it does give you faster, you don't really have to run as far to, I guess, get a hit with it and that sort of thing. But it's just not going to be something that you want to use when you're doing endgame content at all. You can use this in PvP, but this is a PvE focused monument video. But even in PvP, it's kind of a meme. But moving on. Next, we got Polaris Lance. Thankfully, at the time I'm making this video, this thing has been fixed. The Polaris Lance catalyst was bugged for a while where you couldn't actually complete it. This weapon, to me, being a 150 scout, isn't terrible for endgame content. And the whole reason for that is because it has good range. It obviously has good impact being a 150. It's a hard-hitting 150. The stability is really good, so it's really easy to control. And then it's also one of those things that when you get precision shots, if you hit your shots and you hit 4 in a row, you obviously get a solar explosive that is similar to Dragonfly, but you don't have to get a kill with it. And in endgame content, scouts are honestly, they're pretty top tier. They don't get as much use because of Arbalist, but if you're unable to get Arbalist, you're going to want something that you're going to be able to hit consecutively with on barriers. And I guess the other thing about it is that when you hit a precision shot, it returns the shot to the mag. So it's almost like having an infinite ammo gun that you never have to reload. And you're going to be able to break barriers all day and do good damage to them with Polaris Lance. And you're going to be able to get that splash damage on them, which, is always nice when all the enemies have a lot more health at the end of endgame content. The catalyst for this, let me see here real quick. Polaris. The catalyst for this, I guess, precision kills do get a damage explosion, which, this is the Firefly. So you do get Firefly for when you get precision kills, so you get even more damage with this weapon once you get more damage once you get the catalyst for this, but it isn't really required. But thinking about that for Polaris, I am going to put this one in the A tier. I think it's a pretty solid weapon. I've used it on many occasions and that sort of thing. But I think that Polaris is, a pretty fun weapon to use in endgame content. Moving on, next we got Whisper of the Worm, our only heavy exotic sniper of all these weapons and that sort of thing. And I guess the thing about this weapon is that, it has mulligan, it hits really hard, but overall they nerfed this thing. And I mean, when you rapidly land 3 precision hits, it completely refills the magazine, so it's like triple tap on steroids. You only have 3 shots in the mag, and it fires really slow, so you got to be able to hit your shots. But overall, Whisper, I think, being nerfed as it is, and it was one of those things that, once it was nerfed, its viability really dropped. Nobody's really using heavy snipers in endgame content. I know that looking at, the catalyst, you get pretty much box breathing, which is when you aim for I think it's a second and a half. You get bonus damage for it, but it's really not worth it considering you're only going to be able to do it once per mag, and if you're waiting to do damage, you're losing damage in the end. So it's just overall a weapon that, was really strong and was nerfed in that sort of thing. But I think that Whisper, you could still use it if you really needed to, but overall, I mean, I think you're better off going with sleepers. So I'm going to be putting this in the B tier. Um, the second to last weapon that we have in here, Outbreak Perfected. It is a 450 lightweight pulse rifle, meaning it's kind of at the lower end of the damage, but these recently did get buffed last season. And Outbreak Perfected has actually been used by some of these world's first raiders, even for Vow of the Disciple. They used this on Caretaker when they were running out of ammo, because even though it's a primary and it doesn't have any like stasis archetype or anything to go and synergize with anything, you do more damage the more you hit something in the head, and the precision damage for 450s went up, making them better in PvE and PvP and that sort of thing. But this is a very good weapon, I think, in terms of being able to control ads. You get these Siva nanites, which pretty much swarm and are tracking. And this weapon, was a part of one of the hardest missions because it's such a standout weapon. And that you can almost plug this into any build. It has, pretty good range, for 450 and that sort of thing. Good aim assist. The rate per minute is really good. You can use this, and I mean, obviously, really good recoil, and I mean, just a really smooth gun. One of my favorites, honestly. I don't really use it too much, I guess, but you can use this in almost any endgame content. And I mean, for that, I am actually going to be putting this one in S tier, because you just have so many things you can do with it, and that it does a lot of damage. And I mean, pulses they're pretty good for endgame content. And I mean, the thing with this is that, I mean, it being a primary exotic is, if you didn't know, you get more, you're more likely to get more heavy weapon drops and that sort of thing for ammo if you're using a primary exotic. But moving on, I'm not going to talk about this next weapon very much, because I actually, as you can see, I don't have it myself. But Legend of Acreus is the first, I guess, raid memorial weapon we were talking about. You could get this from one of the older raids. And while they did buff this season, and I've heard that it does do really fat DPS, it's very situational, because even though it's a 100 range shotgun, shotguns were kind of nerfed and that sort of thing. And I mean, they don't really have that much good range. This isn't a slug, which is typically what you use for any sort of DPS with a shotgun, but it's kind of a special case. It can do really fat damage, but it's one of those things that you're not always going to be right up on a boss, to be able to use this. So it's like, its damage is really, really good. Don't get me wrong, and especially, I mean, if there's arc burning or anything, you're gonna melt anything with this. And then I guess the other thing about it is that you're using heavy ammo for this. So it's a heavy shotgun, one of the only like 2 heavy shotguns in the game, but it's really tough to fit into a build and use effectively and safely out of harm. So for that, I am going to put it in the C tier, because it is really situational. It depends on the boss, and you have to have a specific strategy in order to use this. But that concludes, I guess, the Red War exotics. Now we're going to be moving on to Forsaken. And that comes up to our first weapon, called Ace of Spades. Ace of Spades is honestly like, kind of pretty much a fan favorite. This gun, honestly, to me, has, it's really good in PvP, and then it's pretty good in PvE. It has good range, which is what you want on any 140, because you don't want to have to be too close, because then you're really it's not optimal stats. When you do precision kills with this, it causes targets to explode, and it deals solar damage to nearby enemies. So even though it doesn't have any sort of damage and it's a kinetic weapon, you have a solar damage option. And it also increases your reload speed, so it behaves just like, it says Firefly here, but it's a different logo and that sort of thing. But then the other thing about it is that reloading after a kill loads the magazine with a few extra damage bullets. And it also grants radar like Mida while aiming down the sights, which is it's just kind of sugar on top of already having a good amount of abilities and that sort of thing. When you have Memento Mori 2, when you've killed a few red bars, you get more damage, and that sort of thing. And you can obviously use this pretty well. I wouldn't say it's anything crazy, but it's like you can use this in PvE because the damage is pretty good on the Memento Mori if you're good enough to proc it frequently. But because it's a hand cannon, I am going to have to say that it's pretty situational, and I'm going to be putting it in the B tier. Because it really depends on if you're in a really rangy, like end game content, that sort of thing. But it is pretty good for ad clear and that sort of thing. But moving on, we've got the last word, which is primarily, a PvP weapon. It is the automatic kind of cowboy style, cowboy style fast shooter type thing. Because as you can see, its rounds per minute are 225, which no other gun in the game has. It fires fully automatic. The accuracy on it is really good. They recently nerfed this because the range was just too good on it. But hipfire shots deal bonus precision damage, but it's one of those things that it's like you're not going to use this in PvE because it just doesn't have the magazine. And its reload speed is 80, but it's not anything. For being 80, it feels like a slow reload because it's honestly a PvP weapon. And for that, I guess, last word, I hate to slap it down here, but you really don't use this. I'm going to put it down in D because it doesn't really have a place in PvE at all. The next weapon we're going to talk about is a weapon that's received some numerous buffs this last year, is Le Monarch. And Le Monarch is what's known as the Poison Dart Bow. And it recently got a catalyst, a couple seasons ago. And pretty much what this weapon is good for is that you draw it, and as soon as you draw it and you pull it fully and you hit up, and you fire it quickly after a full draw, become poison arrows. Precision hits with the poison arrows stun the combatant and spread poison to nearby ones. And it has anti-overload built in, so you're able to put this on overloads, keep them from teleporting, as well as maintaining the tick damage on them, which can also stun them. Like if you're maintaining tick damage on them and they do a teleport after you hit a tick damage and their stun timer cools off, then Le Monarch will stun them even if you haven't fired an arrow in like a second or two. The other thing too is that it's really nice that it has snapshot, makes it really easy to just kind of move around, hit targets in the head. And then the catalyst for it is really, really nice because it increases the reload speed and stability, which stability, is like anti-flinch pretty much in this game. And on bows, you would say it doesn't really matter too much, but it's like you're hardly ever going to be flinched out of a precision shot with this. And then with faster reload speed, you can, fling more arrows at them and that sort of thing. And then it also gives unrelenting. So it's like if you're hitting a target in the head and they're spreading poison to nearby combatants, you can be regenerating health, which is very valuable in endgame content. And there's just not too many weapons that are viable in endgame content with this type of thing. And I think that Le Monarch, with all the buffs that it received, is honestly like saying that, can be a top tier weapon. And because of that, I am actually going to be putting Le Monarch as our second S tier. Ahead of Outbreak, honestly, because it has, it's void, so it has synergy. It's a bow with overload built in, so you're not sacrificing a mod slot for that. And then, it also, bows just have pretty much infinite range to an extent. Like, obviously, they're harder to aim, down super far range in that thing, but zoom of 18, is a stat that's like, I guess, middle of the pack, technically, for zooms, in terms of and that in terms of weapons that have, a stat that's or a zoom stat that's like bigger than 18, which is far and few in between. Like usually it has to be some sort of special weapon that doesn't have primary ammo, so it's like overall just a very well balanced weapon, and it isn't even hard to get the Le Monarch Catalyst. I'm pretty sure you can get it just from doing strikes and that sort of thing. So, I mean, just a relatively easy gun to get, a weapon to get, gun, bow to get that can be very valuable in so many activities. But let's see here. Moving on to our next weapon, we have Jotun, which is known as the toaster. The toaster weapon. This is a fusion rifle that fires like a tracking sort of rocket. Like, honestly, in my opinion, I always make jokes about Jotun, saying, oh, this weapon is like a slug shotgun because it's got, fat impact. And then it also, I mean, it tracks, of course, but it's this little pellet that you fire that travels pretty fast. And it hits enemies, and it does, it does pretty fat damage. And I mean, I've seen, many people use this not in PvE, but in like solo runs of things, because it's a very high DPS kind of weapon. You get 4 shots to the mag, I'm pretty sure, and that sort of thing. So you can kind of fire it pretty rapidly, I guess. With a charge time of 820 is a little bit higher than like most fusions and that sort of thing, but this weapon also was recently given a catalyst. I haven't ever actually finished this, obviously, but it's like Incandescent is a very solid perk. Cornered is the perk above that. Incandescent is the one with the little flame, where defeating a target spreads Scorch to those nearby. More powerful commands and opposing guardians cause Scorch in a larger radius. Scorch is really nice because if you're able to ignite an enemy, and especially in like endgame content, you can definitely make enemies ignite, which does really, really big explosive damage. And then, I mean, the surrounded perk is nice, but in endgame content with something like this, the explosion that it causes isn't that big, so you aren't at risk for really blowing yourself up, really, unless you're right up on something. But corner, just being close to enemies, and it's like, especially with a weapon like this that has, it says the range is only 47, which is bizarre to me, because it's like the direct impact, you're always hit and it does really big damage. But the thing to me about Jotun, I guess, that is kind of, I guess, holding it back, is that it really doesn't, you really don't see fusions used in endgame activity. And it's like the animal economy for it isn't terrible. You can put on a scav and reserves for relatively cheap for fusions. But typically speaking, fusions haven't gotten that many. They haven't gotten that many anti-champion mods or anything like that for endgame content. And because of that, I am gonna put Jotun in, honestly, the A tier, because I think it's really underrated, and it's like it's really easy to hit shots with and do a good amount of damage, and it's like you can definitely help your teammates. Disorienting is definitely not bad either. I guess I kind of failed to mention that, but it's like, but it also is dependent on them having solar shields. So it's like it's a little niche in that regard, but this weapon does do really good damage for a fusion rifle. And obviously with, the catalyst, it's just a little bit better with Incandescent. But yeah, that's why I'm going to put Jotun in the A tier. But moving on, next we have our second monument sniper called Izanagi's. Izanagi's is actually a very viable DPS sniper, probably the only one regarded by most of the community, and I kind of agree. Izanagi's was actually used quite a bit in VOW earlier this year, which was the new raid that was released this year, because it was one of those things that, on the final boss, and you're constantly moving around and having to reload, you're not really standing in one spot, so people were comboing this with auto-loading rockets, and some people, and like one of their team using Gallahorn and that sort of thing, and they were doing a lot of really easy damage. Because I mean, if you don't know about this weapon, is you hold your reload button, and it's 4 bullets in the mag. Um, it's four, you put four bullets in the mag into 1 bullet technically that does really high damage, and it has additional range and damage, so it's like you get extra aim assist the more range you have and that sort of thing. And it's kind of an all or nothing, but it's with this weapon, it's like it's pretty easy to hit your shots on, especially with a zoom. I mean, a zoom of 45 isn't anything high, but it's a good zoom to where you're not going in a lot, so it's easier to hit the head. But I haven't gotten the catalyst for this yet because I just really don't use it all too much. But it's like you get more damage on Hone Edge when 4 bullets are consumed, so even more damage. And I know that I was using this on Vow, and it still does, a pretty good amount of damage. But it's like any boss that, I mean, is kind of a mobile, and I mean, if you need a sniper, and I mean, even this season, it's like we have anti-barrier sniper, you could use this. And I mean, it wouldn't be that bad of an option. I mean, sometimes in GMs, it's like you really don't have time to shoot more than one shot. And so this gun is just very, very good in terms of, being relatively safe. Because it's like to peek and put one shot out, you're being relatively safe, which, you're usually playing your life in any sort of end game activity. And for that, I am gonna put Izanagi's ahead of these other weapons here, and I'm gonna put it at the first in the A column. We're actually gonna switch this up a little bit right here. We'll put Polaris a little bit ahead of there, but yeah, Izanagi's just very kind of simple weapon. It takes a little getting used to, because when you fire your shot, you gotta hold your reload right away. Which my reload is T, but yeah, you gotta hold your reload right away to get the shot right away. Otherwise, you're reloading twice, and it becomes a little bit less effective. Moving on to Thorn, another exotic hand cannon that's a 140, just like Ace of Spades. Sorry. And Thorn, the only problem with this weapon that I see is that it's like it does good tick damage. You partially fill the magazine when you get kills with it, which isn't really all that good. Because usually in endgame, it's like you're clearing a room before you move through it, and the range of this gun really hurts it. Like, this gun could be really good. Sometimes they do overload hand cannon. Sometimes, you have unstoppable hand cannon. And anything with tick damage just typically does better, a little bit better against champions in general if you can equip a mod for it. But honestly, to me, I think Thorn needs some love. It doesn't have a catalyst, which is, just kind of bad. You usually want your guns to have a catalyst. But this gun really is only viable in PvP on certain maps that aren't super long and lengthy. But for that, I'm gonna put Thorn in C, because it really just doesn't have a place and that sort of thing. But moving on, we have another 140 hand cannon called Lumina. And Lumina, I think, is very undervalued. There are some people that use this, and they'll use it in raids where it's like they give their allies and themselves a bonus damage. I'm pretty sure the bonus weapon damage is 15% for this, which is, pretty decent. And especially with a gun like this, the way that you get stacks for that is you get kills with it. Using a Nova on an ally heals them as well, which I think is undervalued. Healing has always been something really good in endgame, because staying alive in like GMs where you only have limited revives, staying alive is huge. And then obviously giving them bonus weapon damage. But overall, also really good stats on this weapon. Like the aim assist is really high. Zoom obviously 14. It's a hand cannon. I mean, it's not supposed to have a lot of range. But range is 63, which is good. Stability's good. Handling's good. Really easy to aim and shoot with this thing. Um, but then you have the catalyst, which I have not got. But when you kill Cyan, you get 2 remnants instead of 1. So you're able to do it to 2 allies, theoretically, per kill. And I can't remember how much this stacks to, how many remnants you can have. But you can have quite a bit stored up. And it is really easy to actually shoot your allies, and the game does a good job of registering it. So it's like, it is a learning curve to use it because you have to think about using it for bonus weapon damage and as well as healing. And I mean, if you have allies that communicate with you, then this gun could be really good in end game content when it's like contest mode and that sort of thing, and for raids. And I think that Lumina is honestly pretty slept on because it does have really good stats, and it's just that I don't think people want to adjust to learn a gun like this that has so much going on with it, but is pretty easy to use once you use it, several times. And for that, I'm gonna put it at the top of B, just because it is a hand cannon though, and they're honestly a little bit weaker in PvE. But our next weapon is a weapon from D1 called Truth. Many probably know about this. It's literally the proximity explosion launcher that it has tracking, and then they detonate within close proximity. The problem with that and the problem with rocket launchers is even though the blast radius is this, the velocity isn't really all that good, and there are just better rockets in the game. Truth, I don't think I've seen used quite a bit, because the thing about it is that like there's damage fall off when you don't directly hit, and that's usually the point of having tracking, is that you want your rocket to direct impact because it does the most damage then. But that doesn't happen with Truth. And honestly, there's not much to talk about with it. I mean, that's just pretty much what it is. It doesn't have a catalyst either. So, I mean, I am going to put it in the C tier, because it's like, if you need a rocket, if you need some void burn, or you need to, hit some big baddies with it, like it's still going to do damage. If, I mean, you have a void burn and that sort of thing, you have no other rocket, but really there's kind of no point to getting this, right away out of the monument. But, moving on, the next weapon we have is Bad Juju. Bad Juju, well, it's designed to be like a PvE-ish gun, because when you get kills with it, after the first kill, any additional kill gives you bonus super energy. It really lacks in terms of, like, the range is pretty bad on it, because it's a steady rounds. The stability is really good, so it's like you can get crits really easily on it. And I mean, the fact that it reloads off of a kill is nice, and it does fire full auto. But, I mean, pretty soon they're going to be putting into the game that every weapon is going to be able to have full auto on it. And they're substituting for certain weapons that are exotics that already have full auto. But the catalyst, I mean, is nice. The bonus damage to it isn't terrible. But the problem with it is that in endgame content, it just doesn't do the damage because it doesn't have the range. And, I mean, it just gets honestly outclassed by Outbreak in just about every way. And the String of Curses bonus damage is decent, but it's like it's hard to get it because it is even with the extended duration, it is pretty short. So Bad Juju, to me, even though it's one of my favorite guns and I love using this thing, it's just like a gun that, I don't know, it needs something else other than like a steady rounds, and it needs higher range. Like the range is just holding this gun back way too much. And it's like, if you can't get kills consecutively with it, like I said, with Strain of Curses and that sort of thing, you're really not charging your super that much faster. It's really good for, low level PvE content, because you can get your super and you can just, pile drive through enemies without having to reload. But in endgame, Bad Juju it's pretty bad for a pulse. But moving on, we have a heavy grenade launcher that used to be like the top of the meta. This weapon used to be that you used to, have a very large, animal economy for it, with like 24... I think 24 bullets or something without like reserves, or maybe it was with reserves. But it's one of those weapons that, because of the way that it's nerfed, it doesn't really do damage to bosses very well anymore. And I mean, they didn't really reduce it on like champions or anything like that, but nobody really uses Anarchy anymore. I think you could use this if you really needed to like close off a way, because you can obviously you can plant these grenades on the ground. They stick to the ground and form like arc chains between each other, so you can make like a trip mine sort of defense type of thing. But really, Anarchy is just kind of fallen off and hasn't really gotten used. I'm still gonna put it, high up in B, because I think that it's like you're still going to do decent damage with it and continuous damage, and it doesn't have terrible fuel economy, but for you to be using this over a linear in most endgame content is going to hurt your damage. Unless you don't need that damage from when you're playing, but you really would need to, plan around that and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm putting Anarchy at the top, high up in B. But our next weapon, another raid, and then the other thing too, I guess that I'll mention, is that to get the raid weapons out of the monument that the raid is no longer active, you need to get spoils, and 240 spoils is max. And if you do the math, you get off of the most recent raid, which you can farm and continuously do to get spoils, you get 5 per encounter. And 5 per chest, one time. But yeah, so farming for spoils is kind of hard. And then you also just, Anarchy just isn't that good. It isn't one of the weapons that I would prioritize anymore with your spoils. Honestly, I would prioritize Teraba, or even, I'll quickly mention Always on Time, because even though it's not a weapon, this Sparrow actually grants you the ability to kind of evade enemies. Like, they're less aggressive towards you, and Sparrows aren't very tanky at all. So most of the time, it's like if you're doing endgame content, you need to zip through somewhere and there's enemies, you have a high chance of getting blown up or something. But this one is actually at 170 speed, whereas just about every other Sparrow that's released at this point is a 160. But I don't know if it's a bug or if they just did that because it's the only exotic raid Sparrow. But Always on Time is definitely kind of worth to have, even though it's, it kind of sucks to put spoils towards something that you're not going to shoot with. But we're going to move on to our next weapon, which is Teraba. Teraba's a 750, which is an aggressive frame SMG that has, pretty good range, great zoom, honestly. I think that Teraba, since they buffed it or whatever, might have the highest zoom or something. But, yeah, just a really solid, and the stats don't really wow you about this gun, but it is a pretty good gun if you can get Ravenous Beast to proc. It's one of the fastest TTKs, and you just absolutely laser people with this. And then when you do continuous damage, it's like you can extend the duration of it and that sort of thing, and it's like, while SMGs aren't really that good for PvE endgame content, you can still use them depending on if you're really close range, and they do have really high, impact and damage and good. Even though the reload speed on here is kind of low, it's like their reload speed is typically, quicker than other weapons. And Teraba's, I don't know. I wouldn't ever use it, to be honest with you, but it's like I don't think it's as bad as some weapons, but I am going to put it at the low end of B. A borderline C, but I think that it's better than Juju because it doesn't really suffer from the range problem with it being 58. And it's just, Unleash the Beast does do a lot of damage, and it gets charged through you dealing damage and taking damage. So it's really kind of easy to proc for, that endgame content. But moving on to the Shadowkeep exotics, the first one that we have is the only heavy bow in the game, called Leviathan's Breath. They actually recently, I feel like, or maybe they didn't recently add a catalyst to this, but this weapon is pretty much an unstoppable kind of jugger. Or they buffed this weapon recently. So before, the thing with this weapon is that when you fully draw the bow, which obviously you notice that it has a really long draw time, but it does do a lot of damage, even though, because it is a heavy, and even though it's only 60 impact. But this weapon, when you fire it fully drawn, you do an AoE with it, which is actually pretty strong, and the bow itself does a large amount of damage, to be honest with you. The only reason I think people don't use it is they don't want to commit their heavy to being a bow that stuns unstoppables. But I think it's overall, pretty good at taking down unstoppables. And really, depending on the strike, it's like sometimes you get these unstoppables that are right on top of you, and you really need to do some heavy damage to them. And the thing about it was that before is that the initial hit didn't do the stun or the full damage to unstops, because unstops, if you didn't know, don't take full damage, or they take reduced damage until you stun them. And this thing wouldn't stun off of the initial, I guess, pierce of the arrow, and then the concussive blast would be the only thing doing full damage. But Leviathan's Breath is honestly kind of fun. I ran it last season in my build that was like all three champion barriers, because it obviously has intrinsic unstoppable, but it's a fun weapon. You can use it, but it's one of those that's kind of niche, because you don't really always want to commit, a weapon that's a heavy to something that's not insane damage, even though it's good damage, but you really don't have that many bow shots with it. I think it's around 11 if you put on double bow reserves or something like that. But even though it does have an intrinsic, I am going to put it at the low side of A. I think its damage is pretty good. And it's pretty fun. And next we have another anti-champion weapon called Ariana's Vow. Ariana's Vow is a slow-hitting, like, scoped hand cannon that obviously, max range, max impact, but it relies on special ammo, so it's like you can run out of ammo with this hand cannon. But the thing about this thing that really, I guess, gets me is that they have this, but then they also have Arbalest. Which you can't get from the Monument, but is widely regarded as the only anti-barrier champion weapon that you should use. So Ariana's has just kind of fallen to the wayside, and the thing about it is that with the hand cannon, with the scope and that sort of thing, it's like you have to hit the barrier with a couple of rounds in order to pierce the barrier and that sort of thing. So you're just... So, I mean, this weapon, honestly, it has auto-loading, which is nice for a barrier, because sometimes you're using your other weapon and then hot swapping when you have to take down the barrier when the barrier champion pops their shield. But overall, it's like when you have something like Arbalest that has so much in the mag and is so easy to pierce their shields, Ariana's Vow just falls kind of short. And so that's why I am going to list it as... I'm going to list it as a high B tier, just because it does have anti-champion. But moving on to Bastion. Bastion is a fusion rifle that is anti-unstoppable, and it fires kind of like a... I don't know how to explain it. It's like a burst kind of slug type thing, where it's like you fire... They're staggering projectiles, but it's like the range of it isn't too high. But the thing with unstops is that they frequently charge you, so you're just more than likely going to wait around the corner, and that's not a huge problem for this weapon. The thing about it, I guess, that's kind of bad is the fact that it's like... is that it does take a little bit of charge time. So it's like if you need to just stun a champion like instantly and sort of thing, that is a little unfortunate, because they can kill you rather quickly depending on what it is. Like if it's an incendiary cabal unstoppable or whatever else. But Bastion, I think, and the other thing too is, I guess, unstoppables are considered like the weakest of all the champions, and they just don't always even require, a champion mod. Like some teams will go in without, unstoppable and that sort of thing. But I think that Bastion, does good damage. And it's like, it's not insane by any means, but it's like, it doesn't have the worst ammo economy and that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm going to rank it just above Ariana's, or maybe just below. Because it does have an anti-champion, and, it's relatively easy to aim and hit with. So it's like, you don't really have to worry too much when you're using Bastion against an anti-champion. And I guess the one thing that really hurts is that it doesn't have a catalyst. But, yeah, moving on to our next weapon, we got Symmetry, which is a rapid-fire scout, 260 rounds per minute. This scout is really interesting because while it doesn't have that much range because it's a rapid-fire, it has really great aim assistance. And the thing about this gun that makes it unique is that it has a secondary fire mode that still counts as like scout rifle shots and that sort of thing. And you can actually use this in like an arc burn strike for barriers, like this season. And the anti-barrier scout is very, very common. So it's like you're going to be getting a gun that, you're more than likely going to be having, an anti-barrier mod for. And the thing about that is that when you hit, I guess with the catalyst, you increase, it's called dynamic charge on it. So once you hit, if you don't have the catalyst, it's 15 crits on the head. You can actually hold your reload button in order to switch it, and they fire these arc seekers that are practically like grenade launcher type things, but they're tracking. So it's really easy to hit. They hit really hard. This thing fires full auto because it's a rapid fire. So it's just one of those things that you can use Symmetry, to do really well against anti-barriers. And when there's arc burn, this gun absolutely claps. And in PvE, it's relatively easy to hit crits usually. But I guess, yeah, when you get the catalyst for this, it just increases the number of dynamic charge stacks you have to 20. And to be quite honest with you, it's just one of those things that even when you hit 20, it's like one of those things that you have to be firing pretty much your stacks the whole time, because once the timer is over with, you can still fire these tracking rounds, but they just don't do the damage that they would when they have the Revolution proc on it. But Symmetry, honestly, to me, is a really good scout that you can use in just about any strike, even though the range is this low. Because it's a scout, like, it really doesn't need insane range or anything like that. But I'm gonna put it just up by Polaris Lance, just because I think Polaris Lance outperforms it a little bit better, because its ability is just, more consistent and longer lasting. And with Symmetry, it's like you kind of have to time when you're going to use it or know when you're going to need to use it and that sort of thing. It takes a little bit more decision making. But yeah, overall Symmetry, a pretty solid weapon. Now our fourth weapon of Shadowkeep with anti-champion mods, a sidearm called Devil's Ruin. It is a 300 arc type, but the oddball thing about this weapon is that you can hold the gun to fire a high charging laser. I'm not gonna lie, I've never actually used this myself, but this is mostly a PvP kind of meme weapon that, it does shred, and the laser beam that it fires does. I don't think it hits very hard in PvE, and it'll stun. But overall, it's like sidearms are it's one of those things that it's an unstop. It's a sidearm. It has all right stats. The reload speed isn't really that good on it. The magazine is 15, which is, pretty close to average, but it's like there's really nothing too special about Devil's Ruin, I guess. You could use it for unstomps, but it's like you got to be really in tune with the weapon in order for, I feel like, it to be in PvE. And for that, I'm going to put it at the high end of C, but overall, it's like this isn't really a weapon that you're probably going to use, to be honest with you. And moving on to our next weapon, which is a 720 rapid-fire auto rifle called Tommy's Matchbook. Pretty much this is the drum mag kind of, classic fast firing weapon that has, 100 rounds in the magazine. But the thing with this gun is that it deals damage to you. And I mean, the only perks that it has is that when you hip fire it, you don't take as much damage. But it's like when you are firing it full auto, it's, and that sort of thing. But it's like it has 0 reload speed. So even though it's a rapid fire, when you empty the mag, you get that sort of thing. The catalyst really it's kind of bizarre. I haven't gotten it myself because it's kind of a waste. It's kind of a waste of a weapon. Like, it really doesn't have that much going for it. 720s aren't terrible for endgame content. They fire fast. They do decent damage. But it's like overall Tommy's matchbook is just kind of one of those things. It's like you don't want to do damage to yourself. For that, I'm actually going to put it in the low part of C. I think that, any of these weapons would be more viable. But Tommy's matchbook is just kind of a meme weapon. And I guess the next weapon we have is even kind of more of a meme. The Fourth Horseman, which you think would just be some sort of, badass shotgun or something else. It's like this weapon, it fires full auto. It's a 360. It doesn't have any range. And it does more damage, but it does more spread. So it's like you got to be right up next to people. It isn't hard to control. It is a kind of weapon that I've started using just to kind of joke around with. And it's like if you do get the catalyst for it, you get 5 shots and you get increased reload speed. But really it's a shotgun that's like a DPS shotgun that's not a slug and is just kind of a meme. So it really, just has no place in PvE, really, if you're running this, like you're just trolling. So I am going to put it as like the lowest tier weapon on our list so far. I think that it's really comical. And now I guess we're to the last row of exotics here, which will be fun. And the next one might honestly be the best, weapon in here, to be honest with you. And we have Wither Horde. For those of you that don't know, this is a grenade launcher. And you might think, oh, no blast radius, no velocity, but it's actually really nice that that's the case. It's really easy to honestly aim and shoot once you get practice with it. You don't actually need to aim it, dash when I said that. But pretty much what this weapon is for the ability to stonewall opponents and to make them take a lot of damage, because when it hits the ground, it makes a pretty decent sized circle that enemies have to walk through, and the blight just does continuous tick damage. And even the fact that it has black powder is kind of one of those random things that you don't really know about. But it's like when things blow up when it blows up next to enemies, even though the blast radius isn't that big, you do more damage because the explosion is more effective, I guess, is the thing about it, is, and that sort of thing. It's not as random. But the thing about this is that you can stick it to a gold bar. It does continuous DPS. If it kills, the enemy, then it drops a second Wither Horde that lasts the same amount of time and it's pretty much the same thing as when the mine is on the ground. Like, that's the best way I can have to describe it. The catalyst for it pretty much increases the handling, so you can use it as a hot swapping weapon. When you holster it, you hear the reload sound, so you can just constantly switch. I commonly use this with a linear because, you'll use a legendary linear with firing line with this, and you'll do overall a lot of DPS. The one thing that I guess is kind of holding it back is that you can only have so many tick damages on, an enemy at a time, so you can't just keep shooting it. And the fuel economy for this thing is really, really good. So it's just overall a very well-rounded weapon. And with no hesitation, I'm going to put this at the very top of weapons and monuments because you can use it in just about any activity. Any activity you can be using this thing. But moving on to the next weapon, we got Ruinous Effigy, which is a very unique trace rifle. Trace rifles are pretty much the actual laser beam weapons that you see in the game. And what Ruinous does, which is kind of, I mean, not really that good for, I guess, end game or anything like that, is it creates these spheres that when you kill an enemy, and I mean, it goes on a little bit of a cooldown, so you can't just keep generating them. You can grab these spheres and you can either, the light attack is saying that it does kind of light damage and you can keep on doing it. They have a certain like lifespan or ammo capacity to them that you can see when you grab them. The heavy attack, you slam it into the ground and it pretty much just does an explosion but doesn't hurt you at all, of course. But the four is that you guard and you drain nearby combatants. I don't think it's any good. Like, it doesn't really protect you, it doesn't really guard you too much, and the drain really just isn't, super super good. It's just one of those random things, I guess, that Bungie decided to throw it on there. um when you get the catalyst, it's really, you need to have two people working together to do this, which I just think that this makes the weapon catalyst kind of useless. So the weapon itself deals increased damage against targets damaged by transmutation spheres. I actually don't know how much this damage is, but nobody uses this really. And I mean, trace rifles, while they do good damage and have pretty good, fuel economy, because they have, you can have over like 500, I guess, like, I don't know how to say it, ammo of it, like each tick that you fire of sustained damage. I mean, these things go, obviously, rounds per minute is like the highest in the game. But yeah, because it's a continuous beam, but overall, traces are kind of funny. And Ruinous wouldn't be the one that I would be using in endgame content, even though the other one that is not in the monument. But Ruinous, I mean, you have good stability, you got good range, the aim assist is pretty good and that sort of thing. You can use this and that sort of thing. They do sometimes do trace rifle. Like, I think the last trace rifle champion mod was Overload, and that was last season. So it's like, it's not bad for overloads, because it's like you need to do continuous damage to them. But then the other thing about that is that you usually use Div, which has built-in overload. But obviously that's a weapon that you need to do a quest for. So it's just kind of one of those things that you really, I am going to rate Ruinous higher than a number of, like, a couple of these, but otherwise the middle of C, because it's pretty niche, and it really depends on if there's anti-champion mods, which there is not this season for traces. But maybe, I mean, they've been trying to push traces a little bit more and more, and I mean, maybe they're going to have champion mods like every other season for them. But, moving on from Ruinous, we have the Traveler's Chosen, which is a 300 full auto sidearm. The thing about this gun that I think is kind of a sleeper with it is that it does have really good stats. It fires full auto, so it's easy to just kind of aim down and beam and that sort of thing. But gathering light is really nice because, I mean, assuming you're not dying and losing the stacks for this, when you get 10 stacks with this and you consume them and that sort of thing, you get full ability energy. I don't think there's a build out there that I haven't used where you don't get all of your abilities back if they're all on cooldown if you get full energy. The catalyst for it is, I mean, I guess the catalyst gives full auto, but they're changing that. This weapon is going to have, I believe, surplus on it when they update it, when the full auto like update comes out next season. So it's like they're going to be giving surplus, which gives handling, stability, and reload speed. And I mean, this gun overall, really good stats. The only thing low is reload speed, but it doesn't really matter too much. But you also, when you use a grenade with this thing, you change its archetype, so you can theoretically have synergy with any class with this gun. And it just has really all around good synergy. The only problem with it, I guess, is that it is a sidearm. And sidearms don't always get the best of use because they don't have, I mean, this one has good range, but they don't have the best capabilities at longer distance than other guns do because of the limited range of sidearms. But honestly, I think that this gun is definitely better than Devil's Ruin, even though, Devil's Ruin has an anti-barrier intrinsic, and it definitely can fit into builds where it's like you're trying to, kill a lot of red bars and that sort of thing, have your grenade up and that sort of thing to do more DPS, which is always helpful. So I am gonna put it higher than Rat Cane, and Sturm, but I'm going to leave it below Anarchy because I think it's pretty niche. You can use it, but it's not something you want to prioritize. But it is overall one of those weapons that I got out of here that I was like, I had a lot of fun with this weapon. But that concludes Shadowkeep exotics, and that moves us on to kind of the final stretch of where we don't have that many because it's the last 2 years, less than 2 years, and we move on to Beyond Light, and we've got this weapon called Duality. Duality is an interesting shotgun because while it is in a aggressive frame, if you aim this thing, it does a slug shot. And this weapon doesn't get as much use since they nerfed shotguns, but it was second only to Chaperone in terms of like exotic PvP shotguns and that sort of thing. But honestly, I'm not going to cover it too much. Even though it does fire a slug, it doesn't have any sort of damage perk and that sort of thing. You do get more range when you get the catalyst, which is nice, and the magazine goes up. But overall, shotguns aren't really used. Like this season, they have Unstoppable Shotgun, which is kind of nice. But it's kind of one of those things that it's like you don't really always use a shotgun. It'd be very situational, and you would have to plan around the fact that you have an exotic shotgun and which primaries you would want to use. So honestly, with Duality, it's like I'm gonna put this next to Acreus, just because I don't think it has that much viability. They did buff pellet damage recently, but it still doesn't really compare to slug because you're able to get better precision damage with slugs and that sort of thing. But yeah, really kind of a unique weapon that is good, but it just, I mean, you don't really use this in PvE. But moving on to our third bow our third bow in the our third bow in the monument, being Tiku's. Tiku's is interesting because it's one of those that it's like it has tracking arrows if you're hip firing it, and targets marked by these projectiles explode upon death. So it's one of those things that it's like you can use this, and anti-barrier bow can be something that comes around like a good amount, I would say. So it's like you can use this because explosions are always good, doing AoE damage, and GMs is always good to get rid of more enemies quickly and whittle down the tougher gold bars that you see. But you also get increased, perfectly drawn arrows that detonate sacred flames increase the arrow damage as well. So it's like you can be kind of just tagging these enemies. You have infinite ammo, obviously. The stats on this bow are really good. And you can keep on shooting, and it has a really low draw time as well. But yeah, it increases the bow's power, which isn't that bad. And I mean, you can just keep on doing, damage after you're able to proc that. And it's just a really easy, straightforward bow to use. And you can definitely like peek shot with it plenty. Tagging enemies, making them blow up, giving the tick damage to them. I mean, and this obviously being a solar bow, making things blow up and that sort of thing has potential to have good synergy. And for the most part, solar subclasses in terms of at least Hunter and Warlock are really good because Warlock's well is just one of the strongest, if not the strongest defensive and DPS super in the game, and has been for a while now, and it's used in most, if not all, GMs to some extent, unless a team has a specific strategy. But it's like, yeah, no, Solar is a very good archetype, and even Solar Titan has its uses where it's like the hammers blow up and you do a lot of damage, creating a lot of sunspots. But it's like you can have an all Solar team of like all three Guardians, and you really wouldn't have to worry too much about each one not doing something. So Tiku's, honestly, just because it is pretty easy to use, the catalyst is pretty nice for it. The damage isn't too bad. I'm gonna put it up at the end of A. It might honestly be a little bit bold to say that, but I do think that Tiku's isn't that bad for endgame content. And I guess one other minor thing is that there have been times when Bungie has done a modifier where they make explodies like extra small, like Screebs, and if you have tracking on this, you're not going to miss them. And then they're not going to sneak up on you and, blow you up pretty much. I knew people that use Tikus. I can't remember what strike it was, but these tiny things called Screebs that are pretty much suicide bombers come at you, and they blow you up usually, and then they one shot you pretty much. So it's just one of those things that you gotta worry about. But our last sidearm of the video, we have Cryosthesia 77K. This sidearm has really, really, really good stasis potential because it can freeze, and it's not saying that you have to use a grenade or a melee. Personally, I think that this pairs really, really well with Stasis Warlocks because they have so many ways to freeze. They can get a lot of abilities. You can use Stasis Turrets, which are really, really, really good in almost any endgame content. Like, you really can't go wrong with a Stasis Warlock because of the safety of their super, the fact that they can freeze targets. Freezing targets is really strong because they can't do anything when they're frozen. When you get this thing going and you're shattering a frozen target, it refills the magazine from this. The only thing about it is that it's obviously a sidearm. I hate to keep saying this, but sidearms aren't always used. But it does have like an AoE slow and that sort of thing. And that sort of thing. But this gun really, really, kind of a high skill gun, to be honest with you, knowing how to use it, when to reload, what to freeze. You could just go with freezing the gold bars and the big minis, all the time as well. So it's like just a gun that, if you can use this gun well, kudos to you. But Cryosthesia, honestly, I think would be probably a little bit below Travelers, just because Travelers I feel like is a little bit easier to use, and who doesn't always want abilities, And I mean, obviously Cryosthesia, if you're using, Stasis, it's like it kind of helps you to not have to use abilities to freeze all the time, but requires kills. But yeah, overall, just a pretty good weapon, to be honest with you. Pretty easy to use. The rounds per minute is 260, which isn't a 300, but it's pretty easy to hit your shots with. But yeah, Cryosthesia, kind of one of those stasis weapons that it's like, I think only 1 and 2 stasis weapons in here that, you can get to have your stasis synergy. But moving on, we have Lorentz Driver, the weapon that's been, kind of, a lot of people, BM people, that anybody that uses this in PvP. It's a linear. That's a special linear. Only the second special linear in the game. I wouldn't say it's bad in PvE, but the thing about you get bonus damage off telemetries, but you get it for a long duration, so it's like it's better, but it's one of those things that it's like you don't really want to use Lorentz because you're going to usually be using something with an anti-champion, and Lorentz being a linear that's competing with Arbalest just kind of takes it down a little bit. I do think that the ability it has to suck things in when you get a precision final blow on it, and then, I mean, it also you get an additional detonation that is nice, and the ability to draw enemies together and throw grenades effectively is really nice. But you don't really see Lorentz because they don't really do linear fusion rifle champion mods at all. So it's just one of those things that you're probably getting rid of a champion mod. And it's like Lorentz and Endgame, it's like, yeah, sure, you can do a lot of big damage to big baddies by getting a bonus damage thing that lasts a long time. But it's just outclassed by Arby, which isn't in the monument. So it's like, if you don't have that, maybe you can run this, and then you run a primary kinetic or stasis, or something like that. But it's like Lorentz, I feel like this doesn't really have a place. I feel like they could really bring this into viability if they gave it something that was anti-champion. I guess You get enhanced radar with the upgrade, which you don't really need though, because it's like you have like infinite range, and in PvE it's like everything is pretty straightforward when you're firing from longer ranges. But Lorenz, just because it is a linear, I think it, you could combo this if your team was willing to, cover a mod for you and that sort of thing. I am gonna put it up higher here, but I just think that its uses are kind of limited. But yeah, I'm gonna put it in the B tier, the high end of the B tier. Um, but moving on, we have Ager's Scepter, which is the only stasis trace rifle. This weapon is really interesting, I guess, for PvE because, like I said, sometimes you do have anti-champion trace, which they started doing last season, and they've been really promoting, and buffing traces. So that Bungie, you know, it's one of those things that you could. They definitely seem to have some like favoritism. I feel like towards them. But who knows? I mean, they might do anti-trace, sometime soon. But this weapon is really good because it's. I mean, I guess like Cryostegia, it's like all you need to do is final blows of the weapon generate a slowing burst around the defeated target. So it's like if you have a lot of baddies that are pushing you and that sort of thing, you can hit the red bars and slow them, and it's a pretty moderate slow. And I think it's like 2 red bars will freeze like a bigger target, and it's like it gets reloaded from killing enemies that are frozen. So it's like you have kind of a laser that you can keep shooting. So you do have to watch ammo a little bit. But then the other thing too is I guess, if you drain your super energy with it, which isn't really recommended to be honest with you, but it's like it does do decent damage as a trace for that. But I guess, yeah, I guess I'm kind of thinking with this is that, I mean, it's a trace. It's got decent range. They recently got buffed to acquire targets better. And I think it's way better than Ruinous. Ruinous, just you can't really use the spheres at all. But I'm actually going to put this at the high end of B. And then I guess the other thing about it is that it's, like I said, it's a stasis, but you can, so you can use like an elemental primary where that's your primary shield taker and that sort of thing. So you're really not sacrificing in terms of like breaking shields at all. But that's it for Beyond Light. We don't have as many now because we're obviously near the end where more of these exotics from these seasons are attainable. So we really only have 2 from this season, from this year. We have Grand Overture, which is like I don't know, the best way that I can describe this thing is that it's like a grenade launcher machine gun that you charge it for the first shot, but if you're able to kind of like tap it quickly after that, you can keep on firing this thing like full auto, I guess, with like, rounds per minute is 100, with a couple bullets, per second or something like that, about. But this thing does do good damage. And the thing about it is that when you hit with this weapon, you get Omega Strike, which you can stack up to I think like 20. And when you press T to fire these things, they fire in like barrages of 5. And you used to be able to do it all at once, but they fire like 5 missiles at a time, so it's like 4 bursts technically of 5 in that sort of thing. But obviously with the with the catalyst, the explosions become a lot better, and it's easy to get the catalyst. You just have to play a certain amount, and you can get this for pretty much free. You don't have to get it as a random drop because it was a seasonal weapon. But they blind the missiles when they explode and that sort of thing, which is really, really helpful for endgame. The only problem I see with this is that Grand Overture is a heavy. Machine guns aren't really used too much, in the heavy slot. Usually it's a linear. But this weapon does do good damage, and it does have a little bit of utility with it. So it's like, I do think that it's like you could use this in an arc, and it's like machine guns typically don't do a lot of damage to like bosses and that sort of thing, but because Grand Overture is kind of a special, like, I don't know, fusion style machine gun, you can do quite a bit of damage with this, especially if it's arc burn and that sort of thing. So I am actually going to put it pretty high. I'm going to put it above like the scepter and that sort of thing, because it has, utility is a lot. Like, it's really, really, really valuable in endgame content. And it does do decent damage for a machine gun. Like, it's not going to be terrible, for damage in comparison to like other machine guns. But moving on to our last exotic, that was the seasonal weapon for last season, is we have Trespasser, which is an old one from D1. Pretty much works the same way. I don't know if you guys played, but pretty much you get a kill with this thing and you reload it and it gives you a chain burst. That'll, if you hit an enemy and you kill him, it reloads the gun. It's a 491 because it's a burst pistol. But obviously really good stats, has, pretty good range. You can use this thing, but it's like it's really kind of weak for endgame because the burst itself does not do a whole lot of damage. You could maybe get away with it if there was arc burn on the activity. The catalyst gives you tunnel vision, which gives you better target acquisition and aim down sight speed, but I mean, even the handling isn't bad, so it's like you don't really need the handling. And the acquisition for endgame isn't really that useful because the enemies are just easier to shoot than in PvP. So it's like Trespasser kind of falls off in endgame content, and it's just, you can use it, and it's good that you have some sort of chain damage to it. So I think it's better than like, some of these other weapons, but it's like, I'm gonna rate it here at the low side of B, to be honest with you, because I think that it can work, but it's just not the best. And like I've said about sidearms this whole video, is that they don't do super well in endgame unless, it's a specific strategy and you're running a specific strategy. But I guess the last exotic that isn't really attainable through the traditional way of ciphers and that thing is Quicksilver Storm, which is a 720 rapid fire. That definitely is really nice. The fact that this has 100 stability makes it just you beam things really, really easily. And it doesn't have a catalyst, which I don't know if they said whether or not. I'm pretty sure they're going to give a catalyst with this thing, but it's going to be coming out next year with Lightfall, because they never do these seasonal or these pre-order ones and not give them a catalyst and that sort of thing, which you wonder what the catalyst is going to be, because this weapon, you land landing multiple rockets loads a grenade, so it's like you do precision damage and you get these. And it lands your next shot into a homing micro rocket. The micro rocket isn't that bad. Kind of gives a special S type thing to this. You do kind of have to learn, how, I guess, the velocity is about that, but it really isn't that bad. But Quicksilver Storm, to me, in the limited time that I've used it, I have 2,500 kills on it already. And it's like 130, even in the Crucible, it's not that bad because it's a rapid fire. But this gun overall, honestly, to me, is like the top of any sort of, is pretty much the top of any sort of exotic auto rifle. And it's kind of unfortunate that it's kinetic, but it does do a lot of damage, because of its abilities and that sort of thing. So Quicksilver Storm, while I haven't used it, auto rifles typically you have overload auto rifle, you sometimes have barrier, so it's like you usually you can get a good amount of use for auto rifles, to be honest with you, in endgame activities. So I'm actually going to put this pretty high. I think that it's, pretty good for damage. And it's like, you just shouldn't sleep on this thing. I want to put it really high because I think it's really good. Haven't really quite used it in anything like that. But it's like Quicksilver Storm, I think, excels as an auto rifle in just about any content you use it in. Because it's really clean, really smooth. And even though it doesn't have a catalyst, I'm assuming we are going to get one because they don't release these pre-order ones without a catalyst, because people feel like they definitely would get gypped paying, the extra money where obviously you get this weapon is only one of the perks, but it's one of those things that, you definitely you want to have, going forward if you want to be using an auto rifle and that sort of thing. But I guess last impressions, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna look. I'm gonna exit out of the game here, and then I'm gonna blow up. And then I'm gonna blow up the tier list itself to kind of show here. Obviously, I guess all of these weapons down here are ones that you can attain through the actual game and that sort of thing. I guess one other one that I'll mention, I guess, that won't be available after this season ends in like 50 days. If you're watching this video at a later date, is this weapon. This weapon is a fusion rifle called Delicate Tomb. It's really interesting because it fires if you're hip firing it, it fires kind of a widespread fan type thing. And then if you aim it, it's, a traditional fusion. But it generates ionic traces, which give ability energy. And it doesn't matter what class you run, but it gives really good synergy with Arc. But Arc is one of those things that it's like, besides Arc Titan, and I mean, I guess, you can use Hunters and you can use Chaos Reach, but it's like Arc Titan is primarily used for endgame because of the Thunder Crash damage that it has. And then, I mean, Hunters do now have a damaging super called Damaging Storm. That's damage over time. That's pretty good damage. It's not the top of its class for Hunters, but it's like you can definitely use Ionic Traces really, really well with this weapon. And when you get the Catalyst, Ionic Traces partially reload the magazine. So it's like, and being a fusion, it's like, it's one of the few style of weapons where it's like, you don't have to be super close range, but you can just kind of destroy enemies and generate these with. And I think that honestly saying that might be semi-viable, in the future and that sort of thing. And I mean, who knows when they're going to give any sort of fusion and anti-barrier mod or an anti-champion mod or anything like that. But I think that, Delicate Tomb is a weapon that you could definitely use to generate ionic traces and get amplified and just do a lot of fun things with. And the animo economy for fusions really isn't that bad. So I'm going to put this at the high end of B, I guess. I'm just going to mention that because this will be in the monument after the season ends because it's the seasonal exotic weapon. But overall, I guess I'm going to look over this a little bit again. I think that, if you're going to get weapons from the monument, you want to get Outbreak, or you probably want to get Witherhoard first, honestly. Then you want to get probably the Monarch just because it's the best. To me, besides Arbalest, it is the best weapon that has built-in anti-champion. But obviously Arbalest is a anti-barrier and this is Overload. But Overloads can be your do or die, really, when you are playing, in GMs. Because they'll teleport behind you, they'll one-shot you, they can be very unpredictable. And then, Outbreak. Outbreak's just a really solid weapon. You get this, you have a good weapon to run in GMs and that sort of thing. If you're going to get this, I'd recommend just being able to have some weapons that you're going to do heavy boss DPS damage, like a linear, and then like a secondary that's some sort of a secondary that's going to be, special ammo or something that's going to be high boss DPS as well, or heavy hitting, ad clear, and that sort of thing. But Outbreak is a really solid weapon. Honestly, like, I look at Izanagi's and it could be borderline S, I feel like, and that sort of thing. But overall, the Monument tier list here, I think, is looking pretty good. Yeah, don't buy these if you're... The only weapon here that I think has any viability elsewhere that's like super meta is Last Word right here. The weapons in C tier, I would not buy any of these unless you're using Thorn for like PvP, Duality PvP. Maybe Mida for PvP. It's sometimes people use it and it's a pretty good weapon. But I guess out of all the B ones, I'm trying to think. I'm actually thinking I'm gonna move Ace up a little bit. think I'm going to move it up above Sturm. I think that the AoE explosions that it gets are pretty good. I want to move Rakina, but it's like it's too situational. It's kinetic. It's taking up your exotic slot. But yeah, overall, I think this is a very good tier list. I actually want to move Lumina up a bit, I guess, just because the bonus damage and the healing is really, really, really undervalued. If you want a fun weapon that is this kind of really multifaceted and just give you an excuse to like shoot at your teammates, and you obviously get bonus damage yourself off of this, then I mean you can use this to give yourself more damage. But overall, I think, yeah, this tier list is looking pretty clean. But yeah, my top 3 picks, Witherhoard, La Monarch, Outbreak. Can't really go wrong with any of these. Not really any weaknesses. But yeah, that's it. Thank you guys for watching, and that's the video. Exotic ciphers, because that's kind of the primary thing that you need in order to use the Monument to Lost Lights. And I just kind of wanted to go over this real quick. So this is lightjet.gg. Tells you everything Destiny, about the weekly rotation, what the rewards are on certain dailies and that sort of thing. And I mean, here I'll collapse it so you can see it how it looks when you first boot it up. You go down here when Xur is active, Friday through Tuesday at reset. You can go and you can click details for Xur. It tells you where he is, as well as showing all of his manifest, including weapons, the armor, the exotic armor that you get for each class, and obviously the Hawkmoon and Deadman's Tale, which are RNG rolls. I would recommend that if you're new and you don't know about these weapons, they're both. Hawkmoon's really good for PvP. Deadman's Tale is, good for both, to be honest with you. The weekly rotation weapon is also something to keep in mind. I mean, you don't have to pay an exotic cipher for this, but this week it's Arbalist. Arbalist is one of the better anti-champion weapons, possibly the best. But yeah, you look at here, and I guess I've took the liberty of going to Xur. He's obviously in the EDZ. He's up on this cliff. You spawn like down there. Here, let me get rid of this. So yeah, I'm in the EDZ. Xur is up on this cliff. I can kind of show you guys how to get up here. There's this cave in the back. You don't have to come through here. You can jump from the side here, down from like the beaten path there, and you can come to see Xur. When you come to see him, he has 2 pages. He's got the main page here, and then on the secondary page, he has these exotic weapons. I already grabbed the Xenology quest, but it would appear right beneath here. And I'll show you what that looks like. So it looks like this. This is literally what it looks like. And you, the way that you complete this is that you go ahead and you can do Vanguard playlist, which you'd have to do 21 of unless you're playing with clanmates or doing it at a higher difficulty level, or Gambit and Crucible wins give you 1 progress, unless you're doing it with clanmates, and I guess I don't know exactly how fast the rate is for that. But yeah, if you're doing Nightfalls or you're doing, with clanmates and that sort of thing, it'll typically go faster. One tip of advice is that if you grab this quest and you complete it this weekend, I would turn it in. But if you wait to complete it or turn it in the next week, you don't have the option to do it again because you had already had the quest when Xur returned. So you turn it in, and it's almost like that's your weekly limit on how many exotic ciphers you can get and that sort of thing. But that's pretty much all you need to know. And I guess I mentioned you can get them from the season pass, and I looked this over. You can only get 1 apparently, and I mean it is on the free track, so you're guaranteed a free exotic if you don't have very many. So it's like 1 week you can get 2. You can only hold 1 cipher at a time as well. I'll tell you that, because the thing about that is that you don't want to be holding on to 1 and be unable to get another quest from Xur. So yeah, just another thing I guess about this is that you got to be kind of diligent. I mean, if you're playing on the weekend, you're more than likely going to finish the cipher quest, and then you're going to be able to turn in and grab your weapon, whichever one you choose. But thank you for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video.